Welcome back. Today's explainer takes us deep into a seriously mesmerizing and, honestly, grimdark fable. We're going to be tracing a massive collision of wills in the absolute darkest of places. It's a journey that essentially forces us to ask, what actually happens when we hit our absolute limits? So, our story centers around this figure known as the Crimson Jester. But get this, the Jester hasn't returned to the earthly realm as some triumphant hero bathed in sunlight. Not at all. Instead, he's initiated this descent into a totally sunless, claustrophobic, subterranean ruin. He has literally become the sovereign architect of his own downfall. Now, this isn't just a physical cave we're talking about. It's a deeply philosophical space. It's a lightless underworld where the very concepts of self and reality are just about to collide head-on.
To really wrap our heads around the Jester's mindset as he walks down this dark path, we have to recognize that he's integrated something called the maw of the absolute. And because of this, he has completely abandoned all those comforting, orderly Apollonian illusions that most people usually cling to for meaning. He's totally done with the myths of the surface world. You see, he's realized that his own identity, his very persona as the Jester, is nothing more than a painted mask upon the face of the nothing. It's intense, right? He's walking through the dark with the terrifying strength of someone who has actually survived the death of all idols. He knows, for a fact, that the void is real, and he simply wears his identity as a temporary disguise over that massive emptiness.
Now, this descent he's on, it isn't just some random hike. It's a highly structured, inverted hero's journey. Rather than rising up to some grand enlightenment, the Jester is intentionally plunging right into the underworld of the blood. So how does this work? Well, first, his surface illusions are completely shattered. Then, he actively chooses the descent, fully knowing he is the architect of his own ruin. And that brings him down to the deep abyss where a truly pivotal encounter is waiting for him. Understanding the structural descent is absolutely crucial because it perfectly sets the stage for a massive philosophical confrontation.
This whole dynamic brilliantly illustrates the core philosophical framework of our story, the Fichtean dialectic. If you're familiar with the philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte, you might remember he posited that the self, which he called the absolute ich, only truly knows itself when it slams into a brick wall. He called this external resistance the absolute not I. In our fable, the Jester is that sovereign asserting self. And that claustrophobic, damp, lightless corridor he's moving through, that is the brick wall. The environment itself acts as this rigid, external resistance, against which the Jester's will just has to relentlessly assert its sovereignty. He is pushing against the dark, and, well, the dark is definitely pushing back. So it's right within this crushing resistance that he finally hits the Anstoß. What's an Anstoß? It's basically a jagged philosophical collision. The precise boundary where the self hits its absolute limit and is totally forced into self-reflection. And in the deepest reaches of this abyss, that boundary manifests physically as a shadow-clad dark elf. Think of this elf as a literal limit, a piece of wreckage claiming to be a survivor from an unknown domain far, far beyond the Jester's previous conquests. The elf is the ultimate boundary, suddenly standing right in the path of the Jester's absolute will.
Now, faced with this ultimate limit, you might expect the Jester to draw a sword. But he doesn't. Instead, he greets the dark elf with active laughter. But make absolutely no mistake here, this is not humor. It is a full-blown metaphysical weapon. The Jester deploys this laughter to perform an ontological deconstruction of the very ground they're standing on. It's like he's using laughter to forcefully strip the not I, meaning the elf in that dark corridor, of its perceived authority. He's literally laughing away the reality of the obstacle, asserting his own sovereign will by totally mocking the very existence of the boundary in front of him.
Completely unfazed by this laughter, the dark elf starts to speak, sharing a wild tale from his own domain, the uncanny forest. The elf describes this forest as a place where the comforting veil of Maya, the illusion of the physical world, isn't burned away by fire, but is actually stripped away by choking, ancient predatory roots. It's this organic, suffocating destruction of illusions, and this immediately clicks with the Jester because it perfectly mirrors his own familiar territory, conal space. Conal space is this void where the spirit of gravity ceased to exist a long time ago, replaced by a terrifying, throne-like silence that's reserved only for those strong enough to actually endure it.
Let me tell you, in this uncanny forest, reality is utterly ruthless. The very concept of reason, totally stripped away. It's revealed to be nothing more than a tangle of dogmatic thorns. And the forest literalizes this idea of slave morality, the concept that conventional morals are really just tools used by the weak to trap the strong. It's a brutal snare. Out there, conventional morality and rational thought aren't seen as virtues. They are literal, predatory traps designed to snare you.
It's an uncompromising reality, where absolutely nothing but sheer, unfiltered will can survive those choking roots.
As he listens to this dark tale, the jester's entire perspective shifts. Applying that Fichtean dialectic once again, the jester realizes something deeply profound. He doesn't look at the dark elf as some alien stranger anymore. Actually, he sees the elf as a byproduct of the self, a giant mirror reflecting his own monstrous synthesis. Since they've both somehow survived their respective abysses, the jester recognizes that this stranger is just a reflection of his own violent clash with the universe. They're basically two sides of the exact same philosophical coin, born directly from the friction of absolute will grinding against absolute resistance.
To actually reach this monstrous synthesis, both of these entities had to endure a very specific, incredibly grueling internal evolution. Step 1 was an agonizing psychological death. I mean, the complete and utter destruction of their old selves, and those surface illusions we talked about earlier. Step 2 required the integration of the Jungian shadow. That means they had to fully embrace the darkest, most terrifying aspects of their own psyches, instead of just hiding from them. And finally, Step 3, exercising their sheer will to power. This allowed them to emerge not as followers of some universal law, but as totally autonomous lawgivers. The jester realizes that the elf's survival wasn't just good luck, it was this exact, grueling exercise of will.
And here is where their shared perspective gets truly fascinating. The elf makes a point to emphasize that this terrifying void, this whole subterranean ruin, is absolutely not a place of despair. In fact, once you manage to integrate your shadows and survive that psychological death, the void completely transforms. It becomes the ultimate playground. When you aren't weighed down by all the illusions of the surface world anymore, the terrifying silence of the dark stops being oppressive. It becomes a blank canvas. It is a space where the sovereign will can operate with absolute, terrifying freedom.
The purifying silence of that forest literally incinerates dogmatic ideals. All the rules, all the morals of the surface world, burned completely to ashes. It's the ultimate blank slate, even if it is a pretty terrifying one. So what's left? Well, only the raw, unfiltered material of reality, just waiting for a sovereign will to impose itself upon the remains. There is absolutely no pre-existing structure left that you have to conform to. In this space, you are the architect, and the ashes of the old world are simply your building blocks.
This all brings us to what the narrative calls the verdant gold truth. It is a primal, totally inescapable realization that both the elf and the jester share. The gold here represents the most ancient, noble strivings, the absolute highest ideals, and the grandest empires, even the legendary empires of the elves. The verdant gold truth is the ultimate realization that all of this gold is eventually reclaimed, swallowed up, and digested by the verdant decay of the uncanny woods. Basically, everything constructed by the ego is eventually going to return to the void. Accepting this truth is the final requirement for achieving mastery over the abyss.
So how does the Crimson Jester respond to this profound shared truth? He shakes his fool's rattle. This is a deliberate signal for the play of the child, which is a state of pure, unburdened creation where you can build completely new values from scratch, entirely beyond concepts of good and evil. He fully accepts the Dark Elf not as an enemy but as a fellow architect of the void. Together, standing in a silent universe that is entirely devoid of inherent purpose, they recognize the ultimate shared task of the Wille-Nar, the Fool of Will.
That shared task is captured so perfectly in this directive. Turn the rhythmic sounds of the world's collapse into a new, harmonious music. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Their meeting in the dark wasn't just a clash of titans, it was a tragic catalysis. Their shared purpose is to take the absolute chaos of the void and intentionally compose it into a terrifyingly beautiful music of their very own design.
Having found a true fellow architect down in the deep, the jester offers the dark elf one final mocking bow. But he doesn't stick around to build a new empire, he simply continues his movement. It evolves into a Dionysian dance, this wild celebration of chaotic, passionate, creative energy. It's the complete and total rejection of those rigid Apollonian illusions he left up on the surface. As he dances further into the dark, he is literally juggling the stars of his own self-created drama. The ruin is no longer a tomb for him, it has become the perfect stage for his sovereign performance.
The Jester's parable leaves us with an incredibly profound reflection. Look, we are all going to face our own external resistance in life, our own sunless corridors, So the question is, how will you face your own absolute not I? When you inevitably hit that boundary, will you retreat back to the comforting illusions of the surface, or will you integrate the shadows of your own abyss and actually learn to dance in the dark? Think about it. Until next time, keep questioning the reality you construct.